Today I'm going to review this guitar called an Inspire Superstrat Smart Guitar. What's a smart guitar? It has a built-in effects processing and a speaker on the guitar itself. So basically a practice amp built into the guitar, which could be kind of handy. And then of course, not only does it have a standard 1/4 inch out to plug into an amp, like any electric guitar, it also has a USB out, which means you could plug into a computer. Let's check it out. USB Type-C cable, Whammy Bar. I'm not sure what that is. Powering an onboard battery. This is a carbon fiber body. I like the color of it. It's pretty cool. It's kind of a satin finish is what it looks like. It's nice. It's kind of glossy, but it's a glossy flat black, which is kind of an oxymoron, I suppose, but it's kind of what it looks like. We're going to see how good a guitar it is, and then we're going to check out its smart capabilities and see how that works. Before we get into the review, we better check the Magic 8-Ball, find out if this review is going to be any good. Better not tell you now. What good are you? To evaluate this guitar and find out, is this, amateur hour? Is this pro gear? There are really two separate things we got to look at. One is the guitar itself, the build, the playability, and that sort of thing. And then the other is all these smart features. And how does that impact tone? Because, of course, tone is part of the whole deal. By the way, I see this guitar on Guitar Center here for $424, less at Temu or AliExpress. So this is an intermediate priced guitar. First, I'm going to take a look at the guitar itself. The neck on this guitar is great. It's pretty much flawless. It's nice and straight. It's got just the perfect amount of bend out, so that the action is nice and low. It could be lower, but I'm not crazy about super low action. It's playable, it's not too high, and it's not so low that you have to be very careful about, your string damping and play with a super light touch, because I like to be able to dig in and hit it hard when I want to. So the action's great, just the way it's shipped. The neck is great, the frets are nice. The radius on this neck, which is the amount that the fretboard curves, is very little. Okay, it's pretty much in the standard range, like it's about like my PRS guitars. They don't have a huge amount of radius, but there is some. And, that makes playability nice. Usually the flatter necks are more kind of like in shred machine type guitars. They also often do thin necks. So in terms of the thickness this way, this neck is, again, in the middle range. It's not as narrow as some, but it's not, fat either. So it's about the same as my PRS, and that's a very good, comfortable middle ground. The difference, though, is that this material that it's made out of is super smooth. There's no stickiness to it at all. When I go back and play the PRS after this, relatively speaking, it feels sticky. So this material is fantastic as far as I'm concerned, and this neck feels about as good as anything that I play. The guitar is made of carbon fiber instead of wood. And of course, the density of the materials, which are normally wood, determine things like the tone and the sustain. So we're going to get into tone later. I do notice, though, that in terms of sustain, if I just hit a note and just let it go, even with the amp off, not even plugging into anything, it goes and goes. Kind of reminds me of Nigel in Spinal Tap. And if you don't know what I'm talking about there, do your homework. Required history for any guitar player. You got to watch Spinal Tap. Anyway, really good sustain out of the materials of the guitar itself. So that's a plus. Let's talk about the bridge here, the Whammy Bar and such. So of course, you can dive, and you can also pull it up. So it pivots, it goes in both directions. It does not have a lock nut on it, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And on the back, kind of a cool thing, that bar that I didn't know what it was, apparently you stick it in here and then you can crank it. And what that does is it'll allow you to increase the tension on the springs or reduce it without, the old school way is you have 2 screws in there, you loosen or tighten the screws. And so if you change your tuning, say you want to go to slack tuning or you want to go from slack to standard, you want to change the spring tensions, it's quite easy to do that. Now, let's talk about how well it stays in tune. First of all, let me say this. There is no vibrato system, in my experience of playing 40 years on everything, that is perfect. If you beat on the thing for a while, you're going to find that some of those strings are going to be a little bit out of tune. So perfection isn't really the thing, we just need it to be close enough for rock and roll. So what I did here is I've got it tuned up and I'm going to pull it and push it and see how well does it do string by string. And by the way, when you do a test like this, obviously the first thing you got to do is play on the guitar and stretch all these strings out. If the strings are new and they're still stretching, well, this doesn't really tell you anything because they're always going to be going out. So I've been playing on this guitar now for a while. I even went and played it at a gig, and we'll talk about that later. But I'm going to do one more stretch. So you go through the strings and pull them, and you hear how much it's already stretched there. I'm going to come back up and do that on each string. The strings are still stretching a little bit, so that could throw a little wrench into this as well. But we'll get some idea of how well this is holding together. So let's take our E and see where we are. Just a couple cents flat, not far out. Let's see, that's flat a hair, that's a hair sharp. This is more sharp. And now it's a sharp. Okay. So the top strings have all gone sharp slightly. Let's see what happens if I pull. Oh, now it's flat slightly. And now we're back into the ballpark. All in all, not too bad. At the most, maybe something moved 10 cents. If I hit the bar again or move it in the opposite way, it kind of resets itself. For pro use, obviously we want the guitar to stay in tune, and it stays in tune pretty well. Sure, it could be a little bit better, but it is very usable. Like I said, I played a gig with it, and I did use the bar a little bit. For live playing, it is acceptable. So on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of the guitar itself, playability, I'm going to have to give it a 9, which is solidly in the pro level camp. And that's amazing for a $449 guitar. Now let's talk about the so-called smart guitar features here for a minute. You have this main button here, which is where a normal volume control would be on a guitar, but this isn't the volume. This is actually a master output volume for the modeling and effects. So basically this guitar has a practice amp, a modeling amp, built right into it and a speaker right there. How's that factor in for pro use? Well, that's obviously for practice. And I can tell you this, if you are on a tour bus or, you're in the back seat of a car going to a gig and you have an idea, you want to record something, well, you could pull this guitar out and turn the thing on. You've got different tones and you could grab a tone you like, record it right there. It's nice. And of course you can use it as a practice amp as well. One of the main things when it comes to practice is if you make it difficult, to set up, your guitar is put away under the bed and you got to get the thing out and plug it in and turn everything on, you're more likely not to. So if this guitar is just sitting there and all you have to do is press a button and there you go. Well, that's helpful too. So this has a lot of functions that are really useful regardless of where you are. If you're an intermediate player, a beginner, or even a pro, you might be able to use that aspect of this guitar. It's quite convenient. Let's turn this on a second. You hold it down a couple seconds now, and you can see that a green light came on around that. I don't know if you can see that, but there are 4 different banks, and as you cycle through it, it shows green, it goes to blue. It says this is cyan, but to me it just looks like another blue. Cyan is supposed to be more like teal, and it just looks like a lighter blue. Kind of wish that they had made those colors more obviously different. And then purple. So those are the 4 colors. The green is a clean tone. Now, it's coming out of the speaker right here. And this is the master volume. And you can tell there's a little small room reverb on that tone. And this is another volume, but this is the volume of the pickups into the software. So, typically you'd run it, all the way up. But if you wanted to do a volume swell, it would be probably going into the preamp. Hit it again. Now we have a kind of a nasty slight bite overdrive, maybe a kind of a blues thing. I'm not really that kind of player, but it might be useful for you. Hit it again, and now you've got a distortion tone. Not a heavy distortion, but I guess I'd call that more of a crunch tone, actually. And then this is your lead tone, so-called lead tone. And it's just a little bit more gain. Still not really a high gain tone, but it's a practice amp. And so, it sounds, it's not a super high gain. You got a delay and a reverb on there too, so it'll... So there's your first piece. It's got the practice amp built in. And as far as practice amps go, you got some effects on there. You got a couple of different tones. It's not a bad practice amp. And then you've got a couple of features here that you can plug in headphones. So when you do that, of course, it disconnects the speaker, which again allows you to, use your practice amp with headphones. The other thing it has is this USB output, Type-C. And it comes with the cord. You can plug it in. That charges the battery, but it also allows the signal that's in the guitar from this modeling amp to be recorded directly into a DAW or something. And then, of course, you've got 1/4 inch out, which is your standard output plugging into an amp. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing. If you're going to use that modeling and you want to plug into an amp, what you really want to plug into is not a standard guitar amp, because you don't want a preamp. The preamp is in the guitar. You want to plug into a power amp, basically, maybe into cabinets. But the truth of the matter is you probably don't want to, because the modeling and tones, although, they're nice for a practice amp, they're not pro modeling. So that's a nice segue into the tone issue. The first thing that we want to know about here, to use this guitar at a pro level, is basically how to bypass the practice amp, how to bypass the modeling tones. The directions aren't all that clear. I read through this and then I went online, and in fact, I even got wrong information from AI. Can Enya Inspire Guitar bypass the amp modeling? AI overview says yes. And how to do that when you plug the instrument cable into this jack and connect it to the traditional amplifier, the internal DSP and amp modeling can be bypassed, and the guitar acts like a passive electric guitar. Wrong. Plugging this in does not bypass. You have to turn this off and plug it in. If you leave the guitar on, it doesn't bypass. It's still going through the amp modeling, outputting through the 1/4 inch. If you want to plug into a real amplifier, or like what I use, the FM9, which is made by Fractal Audio, when you do that, you don't want to signal chain one set of preamps into another set of preamps. Well, you could, but you'd need to know that you're doing that because, obviously the first tone shaping that's coming out of this guitar is then going to front end the amp that you're going into, and it's probably going to be, extra stages of gain, extra noisy, and that sort of thing. If you want to experiment with that, well, that's fine. But if you have a pro amp sound that you're familiar with, like I do, well, then I don't want this modeling amp messing that up. I want to go directly into my sound, obviously. I saw some discussions online about people addressing this issue, basically saying, well, you can run the clean tone and then run it into an amp. Well, yeah, you could, but it's still going to change things. It's not the direct signal out of the pickups then. And worse, if you run, a clean tone out of this modeling amp and you have some reverb on it and that reverb hits a gain stage of a high gain tone, well, you're going to distort the reverb and it's going to sound terrible. The next thing I want to mention about the so-called smart capabilities, which I think would probably be better just referred to as the onboard digital modeling practice amp. But it is that it comes with an app that connects to it, and that allows you to tweak your tones. And I haven't messed too much with this, but here it is. So basically you turn your guitar on and there. These are my 4 different tones. And when you're in the app, you can access 4 versions within each tone. So each tone becomes a bank. If I edit, then I'm looking at an amp there. You can see that you can change these, treble, bass, middle. You've got a volume and a master. And then there's also effects that you can turn on and off here. There's an equalizer. There's modulation, so, chorus flange. There is a noise reduction, and there's a delay pedal and a reverb pedal. And this is the Footswitch, which is an optional accessory. I see on the website that the retail of this is $59. And what's nice about it is it's Bluetooth, so there's no cord, which is really convenient. And what this enables you to do is not only to switch between banks, as you're playing, so you don't have to hit the knob, but you can also get access to 4 variants of each bank. So 16 tones, which is kind of nice. So that's what that's about. And that really brings us to the final piece, which is how good is this modeling amp? How good are these tones? And that requires a little bit of background about what really constitutes a pro tone when it comes to modeling amps. First company that got on the scene with modeling amps was Line 6. I think it was the forerunner. So it got, a big market share. But really, Line 6 stuff, and I used to use it, and, I've seen the Helix and such. It's been around a while. All of that stuff is pretty good, as you hit the different amps, you notice, oh yeah, that sounds kind of like a Marshall, and that sounds like the Mesa, a triple rectifier or something. But the truth is, if you mic up the real amp that it's modeling, and you are in a studio and you listen to the real amp and then you listen to the modeling amp is not going to sound the same as the real amp. It'll give you 90%, 95% maybe even. But there's always something missing. The modeling amps always sound a little fuzzy, a little blurry. They don't quite have the responsiveness of a real amp to the strings. And that really applies to all the modeling amps, regardless of whether Line 6 or Vox or, whoever's doing the modeling. And I believe it applies to this modeling too. I can listen to it and tell that it's not really pro level. There are 2, however, that are. And those are the Fractal Audio and Kemper. And I chose to go Fractal Audio. I've got the Axifex 3 and the FM9 for live use. And these are head and shoulders above everything else because of the level of detail that they've gone to. So if you're, looking for pro level modeling, you pretty much have to go for one of those 2 brands. Those are modeling amps that in a studio environment, the best producers in the world can't tell the difference between the real amp and these modeling amps. Okay, and I've recorded a lot, and the modeling amps are top notch. They give you the sound of the real deal, and they give you the ability to tweak it to the nth degree. And therein lies one of the challenges, because if you know your amps well and you've been using real amps for a long time, you're going to be able to adapt and use Axe effects and really use it for what it's worth. If, on the other hand, though, you're not really up on all this, it's going to give you such a level of detail that is going to be overwhelming, and you're not going to know what to do because there's too many options. 384 amps, and you can go in and tweak every aspect of every amp, every piece of every amp, even to the point of being able to mod the amps in ways that the original amp doesn't even do. So, it's great if you know what you're doing. If you don't, you're going to get lost. So that's the plus and minus of fractal audio. But like I said, it is pro level stuff and it sounds freaking great. So that's what I use. And therefore, this is, going to fall short. Now, I had this brilliant idea that I was going to plug the USB-C cord into the computer and record direct using the tones out of this guitar, and then I'd run it through the Axe effects, and you could hear the difference in tone between this modeling system and what is clearly, the cream of the crop. Unfortunately, however, it's not showing up. The drivers are not being recognized on my Mac. Why would you expect? It's a computer, so obviously things are not going to work right. In any case, the drivers are supposed to show up, and you're supposed to be able to record direct with it. I'm sure that, with enough tech support calls, you can kind of figure that out and get that thing to work. This, however, is a feature that is, in my view, kind of irrelevant because, I'm not ever going to want to use these tones for anything other than a quick practice amp. If you approach this guitar using that functionality for that purpose, well, you're not going to be disappointed. And of course, you're never really going to need to record direct. If you're an intermediate level player and you don't have any good sound card or no, A to D converters, well, I suppose it could work in a pinch. The clean tones on this thing are actually pretty nice, but where modeling really falls short and has trouble keeping up with a real amp is with the gain settings, in particular, the high gain settings. So, number one, if you want to use this guitar and bypass all the modeling and run it into a real amp, or you run it into, let's say, a high-end digital modeling system, that's what I did when I played this guitar live at a gig. I ran it through my FM9, and then I ran it into my power amp, which I use a Mesa 5050. It's a tube power amp specifically for this purpose. And to tell you the truth, this guitar sounded great. Okay, no problems. I am going to be using this guitar. I wouldn't hesitate to use it. I might be a little leery to, really yank on this bar a lot. Frankly, again, it's not bad. You can use it, but just kind of be on the lookout for after you do use it. You want to get used to what kinds of things it does. For example, if it tends to send, the G string sharp or something a little bit after you hit it, one of the things you might do between songs, you grab it and stretch it out a little bit more, or you just do a quick retune of the one string that is going to be off a little bit. And that's kind of par for the course for pro level use of bars and such. All in all, final verdict, the guitar itself is worth more than $449. And the fact that they add these extra tones in here with the onboard speakers, so you got the practice amp, that's kind of a nice thing. And the fact that you can bypass it fairly easily and use the thing as a guitar with pro level setup really, in my view, makes this a pro level guitar for a steal. Consult the Magic 8 Ball and find out if this review is going to be worth watching. The reply is no. Uh-oh.